The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow on my face. I stretched out on the bed, savoring the peaceful silence. Just as I was about to drift back to sleep, my moment of tranquility was shattered by raised voices coming from the living room. "Can't just spring this on me, Elliot? We've barely had any time to ourselves since the wedding." I froze, instantly recognizing the sharp tone as my husband's voice. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly slipped out of bed, tiptoeing towards the source of the commotion. "Mom needs us right now," Elliot pleaded. "She's getting on in years, and after Dad passed, she's been struggling to keep up with the house." My heart sank as the pieces fell into place. Elliot's mother, Lillian, was the topic of their heated discussion, a subject that had caused countless arguments between us. So what? She just moves in without even asking me? I burst into the living room, unable to contain my frustration any longer. Elliot's eyes widened, clearly caught off guard by my presence. "Mara, we were just discussing." "When were you planning on telling me?" I cut him off, my voice rising with each word. "This is supposed to be our home, our sanctuary, but you're willing to just let her barge in and take over our lives." Lillian's presence had been a constant source of tension in our marriage. From her endless criticism of my career to her blatant disregard for our privacy, she seemed determined to drive a wedge between Elliot and me. "It's not like that," Elliot tried to reason, but his words rang hollow. I shook my head in disbelief. "This is exactly why we've been struggling lately. You never consider how your actions affect me, or us as a couple." The hurt and betrayal I felt were palpable. This was supposed to be our fresh start, our chance to build a life together on our own terms. But it seemed like Elliot was more concerned with appeasing his overbearing mother than prioritizing our marriage. As I stormed out of the room, the weight of Elliot's decision hung heavily in the air. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a tumultuous journey that would test the bonds of our relationship to the breaking point. Despite my objections, Lillian's arrival was inevitable. The day she moved in, our once peaceful home transformed into a chaotic whirlwind of boxes, furniture, and an overwhelming sense of dread. "Where do you want me to put this, dear?" Lillian called out, her saccharine tone dripping with insincerity as she lugged in yet another oversized armchair. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to snap at her. Instead, I forced a tight-lipped smile and gestured vaguely toward the living room, already cluttered with her belongings. As the hours ticked by, our cozy sanctuary was slowly consumed by Lillian's presence. Every nook and cranny seemed to be occupied by her possessions, each item a symbol of her encroachment on our lives. "Mom, don't you think this is a bit much?" Elliot finally spoke up, surveying the disarray with a furrowed brow. Lillian scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, darling. A woman needs her creature comforts." I suppressed a scoff of my own, painfully aware that creature comforts was just a euphemism for her need to exert control over every aspect of our lives. As the days turned into weeks, Lillian's influence seeped deeper into our home and our relationship. She criticized my career choices, my fashion sense, and even the way I kept house, all while Elliot stood idly by, too afraid to confront his domineering mother. "Honestly, Mara, I don't know how you expect to make a living with those silly little doodles of yours," she would sneer, eyeing my graphic design work with disdain. The worst part was the way she managed to turn our friends and neighbors against me. With a few well-placed remarks and disapproving glances, she painted me as an ungrateful, disrespectful daughter-in-law, leaving me feeling isolated and alone in my own home. "Ignore her, sweetie," Elliot would mumble, his voice devoid of conviction. "You know how she gets." But I couldn't ignore her. Lillian's barbs cut deeper with each passing day, slowly eroding my sense of self-worth and leaving me questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my life. As I lay awake at night, Elliot's soft snores a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. I couldn't help but wonder how long I could endure this living nightmare. Something had to give, and soon, before Lillian's toxic presence destroyed everything I held dear. With each passing day, Lillian's grip on our household tightened, and Elliot's loyalty seemed to shift further towards his mother's side. It was as if she had cast a spell over him, clouding his judgment and turning him against me. "Elliot, can't you see what she's doing?" I pleaded, desperate to break through the fog of manipulation that had enveloped him. "She's driving a wedge between us, poisoning your mind against me." His brow furrowed, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. But then, as if on cue, Lillian swept into the room, her very presence commanding all attention. "What's this nonsense I hear?" she chided, her tone dripping with disdain. "Mara, darling, you're not still going on about that silly little career of yours, are you?" I clenched my jaw, fighting back the urge to lash out at her blatant disrespect. But before I could respond, Elliot spoke up, his voice tinged with a hesitance I had never heard before. "Mom, maybe we should give Mara a break," he mumbled, refusing to meet my gaze. "Her work is important to her." Lillian's eyes narrowed, and she let out a derisive laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Elliot, don't be so naive. This little hobby of hers is nothing but a distraction from her real responsibilities." As she turned her piercing gaze towards me, I could see the contempt etched into every line of her face. "A woman's true purpose is to support her husband and raise a family. Isn't that right, dear?" The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized the depth of her manipulation. She had been planting seeds of doubt in Elliot's mind, convincing him that my ambitions and independence were threats to our marriage. "That's not fair," I protested, my voice wavering slightly. "Elliot, you know that's not true. We both agreed that we wanted to build our careers before starting a family." But as I searched his face for any sign of understanding, all I found was a blank, impassive stare. It was as if the man I had married had vanished, replaced by a stranger under the sway of his mother's toxic influence. That night, as I lay awake in our bed, the distance between Elliot and me felt like an insurmountable chasm. I could hear Lillian's voice echoing in my mind, her words etching themselves into my consciousness like acid. It was then that I knew something had to change, or I risked losing not only my marriage, but my very sense of self. The battle lines had been drawn, and I had to fight back, not just for my own sake, but for the future Elliot and I had once dreamed of sharing. As the days dragged on, I found myself retreating deeper into a state of silent rebellion. While Lillian and Elliot carried on with their twisted routine, I began to quietly gather evidence of her manipulation and its impact on our marriage. Late at night, after they had both retired to their respective rooms, I would pore over the recordings I had secretly made, documenting every snide remark, every dismissive gesture, and every instance where Elliot had chosen his mother's side over mine. It was during one of these late-night sessions that a message from Anna, my closest friend and a brilliant attorney, popped up on my screen. "Mara, we need to talk," it read, her usual casual tone replaced by a sense of urgency. We met for coffee the next day, and as I recounted the latest saga of Lillian's machinations, Anna's expression grew increasingly grave. "This is serious," she said, her voice low and measured. "You need to start documenting everything, every interaction, every time she oversteps her boundaries or tries to undermine you." I nodded, grateful for her guidance in this surreal situation. "I've been recording her rants and tantrums," I admitted, feeling a sense of relief at finally having someone in my corner. Anna's eyes lit up with a mixture of pride and determination. "Smart move. That kind of evidence could be invaluable if you decide to take legal action." The thought had crossed my mind before, but hearing it spoken aloud by someone I trusted implicitly gave me a renewed sense of purpose. For too long, I had allowed Lillian's toxic presence to consume me, but no more. From that day on, I became a master of covert operations, capturing every instance of Lillian's manipulative behavior on tape. I documented her attempts to turn Elliot against me, her blatant disrespect for my home and career, and her relentless efforts to assert dominance over every aspect of our lives. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But every time I felt myself wavering, I would remind myself of Anna's unwavering support and the knowledge that I was gathering the ammunition I needed to fight back. The breaking point came one evening when Lillian, in a fit of rage over some perceived slight, unleashed a torrent of vitriol that left me reeling. As her venomous words echoed through the house, I could hear Elliot's muffled acquiescence, and something inside me snapped. With shaking hands, I hit the record button on my phone, capturing every poisonous syllable that spewed from Lillian's mouth. This was it, the evidence I needed to expose her true nature and reclaim my life. As I listened back to the recording later that night, a sense of determination washed over me. Lillian had pushed me to the edge, but now, armed with the truth, I was ready to push back, and this time I wouldn't hold anything back. I had planned a small gathering at our home, a chance to reconnect with friends and remind myself that there was still a world beyond Lillian's toxic orbit. But of course, she couldn't resist the opportunity to assert her dominance and sabotage even the simplest of events. As my closest friends began to arrive, Lillian swept into the living room, her presence instantly sucking the air out of the room. With a saccharine smile plastered across her face, she launched into a barrage of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled insults. "Oh, Mara, darling, you really should have consulted me before inviting all these people over," she simpered, her eyes scanning the room with undisguised disdain. "I would have helped you prepare something more appropriate." I felt my cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, but before I could respond, she had already moved on to her next target, my friend Sarah, whose casual attire seemed to offend Lillian's sensibilities. My, don't we look comfortable?" Lillian drawled, her gaze raking over Sarah's outfit with a disapproving sneer. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her usual confidence shrinking under Lillian's withering glare. I opened my mouth to intervene, but a sharp look from Elliot stopped me in my tracks. He shook his head almost imperceptibly, his message clear: "Don't make a scene." But as the evening wore on and Lillian's barbs grew more pointed, something inside me snapped. I couldn't sit idly by while she systematically dismantled every aspect of my life, piece by toxic piece. "Enough!" I exclaimed, my voice cutting through the strained laughter and forced pleasantries. "Lillian, you've gone too far this time." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation unfolding before them. Lillian's expression morphed from feigned innocence to outright contempt, her eyes narrowing into slits. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home?" she spat, her words dripping with venom. I felt a surge of defiance rise within me, fueled by months of pent-up frustration and anger. "Your home?" I retorted, my voice rising with each word. "This is my home, Lillian, the home my parents left to me, not you." Elliot shifted uncomfortably beside his mother, his gaze darting between us as if trying to decide which side to take. But for once, I didn't care about his approval or his misguided loyalty. This was my moment, my stand against the toxic force that had been slowly eroding my life. "You've done nothing but criticize and belittle me since the moment you stepped foot in this house," I continued, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pent-up emotion. "Well, I'm done. I'm done letting you walk all over me in my marriage." Lillian's face contorted into a mask of rage, her carefully cultivated facade cracking under the weight of my accusations. "How dare you speak to me like that, you ungrateful little—" But I didn't let her finish. With a sense of grim satisfaction, I reached into my pocket and pressed the record button on my phone, capturing every venomous syllable that spewed from her mouth. As the shocked gasps and murmurs of my friends filled the room, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The gloves were off, and I was done playing by Lillian's rules. This was the first step in taking back control of my life, and there was no turning back now. The days following my outburst were tense, to say the least. Lillian retreated to her room, venomous glares her only form of communication. Elliot, caught in the crossfire, alternated between pleading with me to make amends and retreating into stony silence. But I remained resolute. For too long, I had allowed Lillian's toxicity to poison my life, my marriage, and my sense of self. No more. With Anna's guidance, I compiled the recordings, the emails, the texts, every shred of evidence that laid bare Lillian's manipulation and cruelty. It was time to fight fire with fire. The first step was to expose her true nature to our extended family and friends. One by one, I sent out the damning recordings, accompanied by a detailed account of the hell Lillian had put me through. The responses poured in, a tidal wave of shock, sympathy, and unwavering support. Lillian, of course, was apoplectic. "How dare you spread such vile lies about me?" She raged, her carefully cultivated facade of gentility crumbling in the face of overwhelming proof. But I was done cowering in the face of her tantrums. "These are your own words, Lillian," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. You've shown your true colors, and now everyone knows the truth." Elliot, caught in the eye of the storm, wavered between defending his mother and acknowledging the undeniable evidence of her misdeeds. In the end, though, the weight of her actions proved too much, and he found himself unable to justify her behavior any longer. With the support of my friends and family, I took the next step, filing for a temporary restraining order against Lillian. The process was arduous, but with Anna's expertise guiding me, we built an ironclad case: harassment, emotional abuse, and a pattern of manipulation that had pushed me to the brink. The day the order was granted, I'll never forget the look on Lillian's face as the sheriff arrived to escort her from the premises. Her eyes burned with a fury so intense it was almost palpable, but beneath it all, I could see the glimmer of fear, the realization that her reign of terror had finally come to an end. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom as she gathered her belongings. "You haven't heard the last of me." But for once, her threats held no power over me. I had taken back control, and I would never again let her toxicity infect my life. As the door slammed behind her, a wave of relief washed over me. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, allowing the sun to shine through once more. But even as I basked in the newfound peace and quiet, I knew our battle was far from over. Elliot, his loyalty to his mother finally shattered, stood in the living room, his expression a mixture of shame and disbelief. "Mara, I had no idea it had gotten that bad," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I regarded him coolly, the weight of his betrayal still fresh in my mind. "You chose her, time and time again," I replied, my tone matter of fact. "You let her come between us, and you did nothing to stop her." His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy. Almost. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I squared my shoulders, steeling myself for the next phase of our reckoning. "Now," I said, my voice unwavering. "Now we deal with the fallout, and I make sure she can never hurt us again." The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Karma had finally caught up with Lillian, and I was going to make sure she reaped every bitter consequence of her actions. With Lillian gone, a fragile sense of normalcy began to return to our home. But even as the physical traces of her presence faded, the emotional scars she had left behind remained raw and painful. Elliot, once so firmly under his mother's sway, seemed adrift, a man forced to confront the harsh reality of his own complacency. He would spend hours staring off into the distance, his brow furrowed as if trying to piece together the shattered fragments of our marriage. "I'm so sorry, Mara," he would murmur, his voice thick with remorse. "I should have seen what she was doing, but I was blind." Part of me yearned to offer him comfort, to reassure him that we could move past this and rebuild what we had lost. But a larger, more cynical part of me couldn't shake the memory of his betrayal. The countless times he had chosen his mother's twisted version of reality over my cries for help. It was during one of these tense, heavy silences that Anna stopped by, her usual upbeat demeanor replaced by a grim determination. "Mara, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and urgent. I braced myself, knowing that whatever she had to say, it wouldn't be good news. "Lillian's not going to take this lying down," Anna continued, her expression grave. "She's already hired a shark of a lawyer and is gearing up for a legal battle." I felt a knot of dread twist in my stomach, but I refused to let it show. "Let her try," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within me. "We have the evidence. The truth is on our side." Anna nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's true, but she's going to play dirty. She'll try to paint you as the unstable one, the villain in all of this." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she will. That's always been her game. Twist the narrative, gaslight everyone around her until they start doubting their own reality." Elliot, who had been hovering on the periphery of our conversation, finally spoke up. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice tinged with a newfound determination. Anna fixed him with a piercing gaze. "For starters, you need to decide whose side you're really on this time. Because if you're not fully committed to supporting Mara, you'll only end up helping your mother's case." Elliot's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with. Strong, resolute, and unwavering in his convictions. "I'm done letting her control me," he said, his voice low but laced with steel. Mara is my wife, and I should have had her back from the beginning. Despite the lingering hurt and resentment, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride at his words. It was a start, at least. As Anna outlined our legal strategy, I felt a renewed sense of determination wash over me. Lillian might be gearing up for war, but this time, I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't afraid to use it. It was later that night, as Elliot and I sat in silence, the weight of our impending battle hanging heavy in the air, that I decided to lay one final card on the table. "Did you know that according to my parents' will, this house belongs solely to me?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Elliot's head snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise. "What? But your mother always said—" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Of course she did. Lillian has been feeding you lies from the beginning, twisting the truth to suit her own agenda." As the realization dawned on him, I could see the hurt and betrayal etched into every line of his face. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, our relationship would never be the same. With a heavy heart, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the stack of divorce papers I had been keeping there, hidden away until the right moment. "I can't do this anymore, Elliot," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Too much has happened, too much has been broken." He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the words seemed to die on his lips. In the end, all he could do was nod, a silent acknowledgement of the harsh reality we now faced. As I watched him gather his belongings and walk out the door, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was in control of my own destiny. Lillian had played her games, pulled her strings, and done her damnedest to destroy everything I held dear. But in the end, it was she who had lost, and I would make sure she reaped every bitter consequence of her actions. The weeks following Elliot's departure were a whirlwind of legal battles, social fallout, and the slow process of picking up the pieces of my shattered life. Some days, it felt like an uphill battle, fighting against the weight of Lillian's machinations and the lingering doubt she had sown in the minds of those around me. "She's trying to paint you as some kind of unhinged villain," Anna warned me one afternoon, her brow furrowed as she pored over the latest salvo of legal documents from Lillian's lawyers. "They're claiming you fabricated the recordings, that you're mentally unstable and prone to outbursts." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they are. Lillian can't handle the truth, so she has to twist it into something ugly and unrecognizable." But for every low blow Lillian landed, I found myself buoyed by the unwavering support of those who truly knew me. My friends, the ones who had witnessed her toxic behavior firsthand, rallied around me, offering a safe haven from the storm. "Don't let that witch get you down," Sarah said fiercely, pulling me into a fierce hug. "We've got your back, no matter what." It was in those moments, surrounded by the people who had seen me at my lowest and still chosen to stand by my side, that I found the strength to push forward. But I had gained something far more valuable, a sense of self-worth and independence that no amount of manipulation could ever take away. As the legal battle raged on, I found solace in the one constant that had always been there for me: my work. Pouring my heart and soul into my graphic design projects, I slowly but surely began to rebuild my life, one brushstroke at a time. It was during one of these late nights, hunched over my drafting table, that the news came. A victory hard won and long overdue. "They dismissed her case," Anna crowed, her voice tinged with a mixture of triumph and relief. "The judge saw right through her lies and ruled in our favor." I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of those words sink in. After months of fighting, of enduring Lillian's endless attacks and attempts to tear me down, justice had finally been served. "What does this mean for her?" I asked, a familiar sense of determination settling over me. Anna's expression grew somber. "With all her manipulations and deceit exposed, she's lost a lot of credibility and resources. Her legal battle has drained her finances, and her relationships with Elliot and the rest of the family are strained, to say the least." A part of me, the part that had been battered and bruised by Lillian's cruelty for so long, couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the thought of her downfall. But a larger part, The part that had emerged stronger and wiser from this ordeal knew that true healing came not from vengeance, but from moving forward. In the days and weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor, transforming the walls of my home into a vibrant canvas of creativity and self-expression. Gone were the remnants of Lillian's oppressive presence, replaced by a sense of freedom and possibility that I had never truly known before. And as for Lillian, well, the last I heard, she was holed up in some dingy apartment, her once formidable social circles having closed ranks against her. A harsh lesson, perhaps, but one that she had brought upon herself with her own actions. As for me, I had finally found the strength to let go of the anger and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was in control of my own destiny, and I had no intention of ever letting anyone take that away from me again.